What's up, space pirates? This is your Admiral, the chronically charismatic Dr. Disaster, and you wouldn't know it based on advertising or general chatter from gamers or anything like that, but the newest Sweet Baby Inc. game is actually set to release in about 3 weeks.
What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, most people either haven't heard of this turd or they've put it out of their minds completely because it looks like every other game consulted on by the likes of Sweet Baby, but here we have South of Mignight. Just another in a long line of strong whammon characters featuring a gal of color, which means that for some people out there, this game must be supported no matter what. But if you ever wanted an idea as to how marginal the group of people who support this type of game are, if you want to know how small the MoDeRn audience is, well, feast your eyes on this. The Steam numbers for this game are a freaking joke, and the developers for this game, Compulsion, can't be too happy when they see those numbers flash on their computer screens. Alright, me hearties, make sure that you hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and also consider supporting the channel by becoming a member for $5 per month. We've got some announcements about some exciting new content that you won't want to miss coming up soon, which will be for channel members only, so be on the lookout for that. But in any event, let's take a look at South of Mignight and the abysmal failure of yet another Sweet Baby Inc. game. Now, Compulsion isn't exactly the heaviest of hitters when it comes to game studios, but they aren't entirely unknown either. They don't have the same name recognition as, say, Obsidian, which put out Avowed last month. That studio's name is the only reason that game got any traction whatsoever. They were light years ahead of South of Mignight in terms of follower count and their spot on the top sellers list, but they still flopped miserably. And this is why we can expect South of Mignight to flop even harder. They haven't even broken the top 2,400 games on Steam yet, despite being only 3 weeks removed from release. That is extremely terrible. In fact, it's tracking behind a couple of the other really shitty Sweet Baby games that came out last year. Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn hit right around number 700 on the Steam chart top sellers list when it released last year, and as you can see from the charts, it failed to even hit 700 concurrent players on Steam. And then there was Unknown 9 Awakening, which was at about 1,300 on the Steam top sellers list when it released, and that game failed to even hit 300 concurrent players on the Steam platform. Now, granted, there are still a few weeks to go for South of Mignight, and it's quite possible that it overtakes these other two games, but this one is so far behind the other two that it seems unlikely, especially with the complete lack of hype surrounding the title. There are no trailers coming out for it, no content creators are discussing it, no game journalists are even bringing it up. Actually, at this stage, I'm of the opinion that the creators of South of Mignight are simply trying to stay as far out of the spotlight as possible because they know that if people pay attention to them, then negativity is bound to come. They are trying to hide, in other words. It would seem, at this juncture, that the studio is simply content to take their money for the game being put on Game Pass on day one, and they want to live off of that. But if you want an idea as to how lucrative that is, or rather is not, for a game studio, look no further than the aforementioned Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn. That game was also a day one Game Pass title, and it sold like shit outside of Game Pass. I remember a few days after the game's release, game journalists were touting the fact that they had hit 500,000 players for the game, as if that was some major win, never minding the fact that it specifies players and not purchasers. What that told us is that out of all the people subscribed to Game Pass, over 30 million people, only 500,000 of them even tried the new game out despite it being free for them. But anyhow, they didn't sell very many copies independently of Flintlock, and as you can see here, there are rumors that A44, the studio that made Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, will be undergoing massive layoffs. And in fact, some folks are saying that A44 has already laid off 2/3 of the studio. So, living off of Game Pass dollars is clearly not enough to overcome the costs of making a AAA game like this. And for those folks out there who are convinced that it's just impossible for day one Game Pass titles to sell well, I would like to refer everyone to two games that I often bring up in this conversation: Starfield and Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. Both of those games were day one Game Pass entries, and both of them have sold multiple millions of copies. In fact, they both sold multiple millions within their first couple of days of release. So, leaning on Game Pass as an excuse for why the games aren't selling simply doesn't work. South of Mignight looks like it is going to completely tank because it is completely forgettable. In a market already oversaturated with strong female POCs as main characters, there is simply nothing to make this game stand out. The apathy is extraordinarily strong for this sort of game. People aren't even talking about it in a negative light. Partially, as I said before, because I think the marketing strategy for this game is to stay as far out of the limelight as possible. They will likely ramp up marketing when there's a week or so to go before launch, but nobody is talking about this game, despite the fact that there isn't a ton of competition. Assassin's Creed Shadows releases in 3 days, but after that, there really isn't much coming out at this time of year, at least nothing that's stealing all the thunder. A lot of big games were released in the past month or so: Monster Hunter Wilds, Avowed, Kingdom Come, but for South of Mignight, there really isn't any competition, and yet they still can't crack the top 2,400 games on Steam. I've said it before, but it isn't rage or anger that kills games and movies, it is apathy. These studios can only put out these female characters with zero sex appeal and zero personality besides, "Look at me, I'm a strong woman." They can only do that so many times before gamers, who are decidedly a majority male audience, eventually we just can't be bothered to even look at this stuff. That is what Sweet Baby Inc. does to a game. Now, Sweet Baby would argue that adding these characters isn't their idea, and they claim that they don't really do any writing on these games that keep failing, which, if you ask me, that's complete BS. We've watched the lectures from their CEO, Kim Belair, explaining how it's that company's mission to push this crap into games, but anyhow, they always seem to push the same character type in every game, and it's a very unpopular character archetype among gamers. And look, if they want to be artists and make something for themselves to enjoy, then go for it. I support that. Just don't come crying to me when yet another studio has to undergo massive layoffs as a result of not listening to the market. But I'm going to leave it there. Drop your contempt for Sweet Baby Inc. and your mockery of South of Mignight into the comment section below, and we will talk there. Thanks for watching, me hearties. If you haven't already, your Admiral is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty of booty.